Hey everybody, this is Jason out in Colorado. Today we're going to make a super shelter. A super shelter is a primitive shelter combined with some modern materials. First off, we're going to start off with a sheet of plastic, just clear plastic. I believe this is a 4 mil plastic. Ideally you would use probably 6 mil. That way it's harder to puncture holes into it. Next you're going to use a sheet of black plastic. I believe this one is 6 mil. This feels 6 mil. And then on the back side, you're going to glue a mylar blanket to it. This is going to add ultimate heat into your shelter and keep you really warm. Now I'm out here with Jeffrey today, one of our students. We're showing him how to build this super shelter, and he's going to stay the night in this thing. It's right now, we're in November. The temperature right now is probably high 30s, 38 degrees, but at night it's dipping down in the 20s to the upper teens. So it's pretty cold. He did stay in a form of this one last night. With just himself and sleeping bag, no fire, and he said he slept like a log. So we're going to give him an improvised version of this. Not an improvised, but an improved version of what he slept in last night by adding the black plastic mylar. But before we get going on any of that, we have to choose a location, and we've selected this location right here. First, because it's kind of close to our main camp, but we've got two trees here that are long enough or wide enough for somebody to lay down in. Student's 6 foot tall, I'm 6 foot tall. My wingspan, my arm here are about 6 feet long. So if I'm not touching the trees, I've got a foot over on the top and a foot down by my feet. That gives me plenty of room to stretch out in, to put some of my gear in. The ultimate test, though, is really to lay down in between your trees and make sure you can fit with some room above your head. We're on a little bit of a slope here, but that doesn't really matter too much because we're going to level this up with the leaves that we put on the ground. This shelter is I know you can't tell, but we're facing a little bit southeast. That way when the sun rises in the morning, it's going to get sun on us, and it's going to track across the sky here in the winter and hit us most of the day, and that's what we want, is to stay warm. Also, I've checked the area. There's no widow makers, no big trees that are going to fall down on top of us, clean up the area. So this is a fairly safe place to put our shelter. So my student's out there right now. He's gathering the wood for this. We need a ridge pole that runs across the center here between these two trees, and then we're going to have about 8 ribs that'll run down from this point down to the ground. So we're cutting 8 or 9 trees. This is sort of a form of a lean-to. A lean-to, we could be cutting 60 or more trees, and it could take you several hours to build it. This shelter you could probably get done, assuming your resources are pretty close, is an hour or less if you were really working on it quickly. So we're going to get started on this, and we'll show you the steps as we go. All right, we got the start of the super shelter set up. We kind of our frame or our skeleton, if you will. We got our main ridge line, the main pole here. It covers this span. If you were in an emergency situation and you wanted to do something really quick, instead of using this wood line here, you could use a stretch of paracord and then just use your plastic built up over it. But we're building a more permanent shelter here, so we're using these solid ridge lines. Something to note, if you're using paracord, if this tree here and this tree here are really large, you're going to use a lot of paracord. Every time you wrap around this tree in itself, every time I go make this pass, I'm looking at 1.5 to 2 feet of cordage. We've got roughly 18 feet of cordage on this tie-in right here, and then 18 feet on the other end. So we've burned through almost 40 feet of cordage just on this little bit of rope on this shelter. What I do here, just real quick, I use a clove hitch. I start on this side, I make a few passes. There's 2 passes here. You can see 2 bits of rope. And then right here, I got 1, 2, 3, 4. You probably can't see it, but there's 4 points of contact here. This piece of rope coming through here is what we call frapping. We cinch that down in tight. This makes this good and stout. That's really not going anywhere. I can push down on that. It's not going anywhere. So this is the start of our super shelter. Again, we got the ribs. These are spaced roughly about 18 inches apart. This is wide enough this way so that I have enough room wide for my shoulders, and then probably about 8-10 inches on this front side so I can tuck myself in here. And then it's a pretty steep angle in that bottom area near the ground. It's kind of unused area. I can't fit myself in there, especially when we get a leaf litter or debris that gets us up off the ground, the cold ground. That area in there is going to be kind of wasted space. So we got to make sure that this is wide enough to give us enough room to sit in here and sleep in here comfortably. But before we anchor these ribs in here, we're going to put the black sheet of plastic with the Mylar blanket that's attached to it. That's going to reflect heat back in towards you. We're going to use some backcountry buttons to tie that in. I'm going to turn this over to Jeff. He's going to explain how to do that, and then we'll continue on with the shelter.
All right, guys, so we're going to use the backcountry button to tie this up here. Obviously, this doesn't come with any grommets on there, but not a big deal. So we're going to use a small, you need something as smooth as you can. This obviously isn't very smooth. It's not that big of a deal. And then a prusik cord. So it's a double fisherman, just makes a prusik right there. We'll do a video about that. I'm not going to teach knots in here. It'll just take too long. But we've got our prusik right here and our rock or something. You can use pine cones, whatever you want to use. So we put it in there. Kind of bundle up everything around there at once. And then do one wrap on there. And now you've got essentially a grommet that you can tie things off to. So we've got our rock right in here, and then our prusik wrapped tightly around there. And this can go whatever we want, or we can tie it to whatever we want to. So for this, we're going to want to have it really, really taut on all sides, so it's not going to be sagging in the middle. And you know, when you think about the reflectivity we're trying to have, if it's convex out, that's not really the effect that we want, you know. So it could be reflecting that heat in all directions. So we're going to have this nice and tight here. So this is where we're going to want it. And we've got our wrap here that Jason did, the frappage. So we're just going to slip this right through here, pass that knot through there, the whole way, all of it. Great. And then we can just tie that right back on itself. And as you can see, it's a really, really nice tight knot. There's no grommets or anything, so we use our little backcountry button. That backcountry button is super helpful in the backcountry because you can really, really get it tight. And if you have a tarp or something, or a trash bag, or a piece of Mylar like this is, you can really, really pull it out tight and put some tension on it. So one backcountry button right here, all done. So we're going to do that on all 4 corners, and we're going to pull this nice and tight. And you can see there, so the button is in there, it's secured on there. So we used maybe 1 rock, a foot of paracord, and a couple knots. And now we're going to have it really, really secure up here. We're going to do the same in all 4 corners and pull this part taut. And then when we come back to you, we'll show you putting the clear plastic on there. So this is the reflector layer in the backcountry button, nice and tight.
Okay, so we got this Mylar and black plastic tied up. For this particular shelter, what we're going to do is have the Mylar on the inside, and we're going to fold that plastic right there over top of the front of this. And we put these ribs up on the top side. It's going to hold that clear plastic up off the top of that, and then we're going to stack leaves on it. You see we got the ribs along the top of it. They just barely go over the top of this. Get down here, you see they don't stick up very far. If they did stick up too far, it could potentially puncture that other piece of plastic. This one right here looks like it sticks up quite a way, so I might cut that off at an angle so it doesn't have that big edge. But a lot of these are pretty shallow. I guess they don't stick out too far. But that's just like a reflective wall. It's going to absorb heat from the outside. So if the sun did hit this, it would warm up out here. It would pass through this heat And then any heat on this side, if we had a campfire, and we will have a campfire when we're finished, it's going to pass through that plastic and reflect off that reflective side of the Mylar blanket back onto you. So there's the start of the shelter. After we got the Mylar and black plastic in there, everything's tied in with some backcountry buttons. You wouldn't necessarily have to have those ribs on here. You could just use the 2 pieces of plastic kind of as a quick emergency shelter, but we're going to do it slightly different today.
All right, guys, so you can see here we have the ribs in here. We've got this tied down. It's nice and taut. It's on each corner. We have a backcountry button that's pulling it. It's staked out, and then we have one in the middle just so it doesn't sag, so it's staked out there as well. Now we're going to put the clear plastic on there. So when you look at it from this angle, you can see it's a real nice flat piece. All that radiant heat that goes in there is going to bounce down just if you want to. We're going to put this down here. The most important thing with this plastic piece is that you can totally cover the door. And you want to have enough at the bottom. We're going to have a log there to kind of tuck the excess underneath so it shuts it really, really well so you don't get any wind blowing in there. So we'll... All right, so going straight down, right about there, we've got maybe one long hand width or length right there. So that's enough to roll that log in there and keep it tight. So we'll pull this tight here, and you can even see there's a little seam right there, so we know we're doing it consistently even the whole way across. All right, so with this, you want to make sure that you totally seal this as well. I mean, the whole purpose here is to minimize the amount of wind that you're exposed to and the amount of heat loss that you have. So when you can tuck that in like that, that's where we're going to put all of our leaves on there. When we put the leaves on there, it's going to pull this a little bit tighter as you put it down there, and it's going to be sealed the whole way from wind. So just remember, we're going to have a whole bunch of leaves and pine boughs and insular material in there. This is combining the best of a super shelter with a lean-to, so it's going to be a good long-term shelter. So make sure that each side, we're going to trim this to fit. Just going to make sure that it fits right now. So there's definitely some flapping in there, so we can pack some leaves on there. When we do that, this is going to be straight down. It'll shed wind and water. We'll do the same thing for other side as well.
All right, so we pretty much completed this super shelter. As you can see, we have a bunch of leaves on the top here. The leaves on a shelter typically are going to be used for waterproofing the shelter. Obviously, this plastic is what waterproofs this shelter, so the leaves are going to be to insulate it. The plastic goes all the way to the ground back here. I think we were a little bit shy, but you know, you have to work with what you got. So the leaves will help with the waterproofness on the bottom, but most of the water is going to flow down. At the very end, it's going to hit the ground, and then we're on a little bit of slope, so it's going to flow away. But on the front side, we took more leaves and put them on the ground here. That's going to keep the heat from it's in your body from being sucked down into the cold ground. It would normally just pull that heat away from you, and you're going to get cold. So the leaves in here are for comfort and from insulation from the ground. So there's a good layer. I mean, this probably really a lot more than we might need, but the more leaves you can put in here, the better. The more insulation you got, it's going to be more comfortable. It's going to be nice and comfy. So you're going to climb into this shelter and get comfortable, pull all your gear in, and then you're going to go ahead and pull this plastic down. And windy conditions, you're going to go ahead and pull that plastic down. The windy conditions, you're going to try and get that plastic on that bottom edge tucked up underneath that log. You know, and do the best you can. You're not going to have a survival instructor out here doing it for you. So, you know, from the inside of your shelter, you're in a situation. You need to be able to get all that completely tucked in there. That way, if the wind's blowing, it's gusting around, you're locking in that heat, and it's going to keep you warm. So while he's doing that, we'll swing around to the side over here. You can see that the plastic goes all the way to the ground here, so we're not getting wind coming in from this side to chill you. And the same thing on the other side, is we have this completely blocked off. And then you're going to want to make sure that this part of this is also tucked in under there, so you're not getting any wind. It's going to be, you're going to have enough airflow in here, so you're not going to suffocate, you're not going to run out of oxygen, but it's going to keep from having drafts. To really, really cold conditions, to finish this up, we're going to put a campfire out here. Ideally, you're going to want to keep it a couple feet away from your from your plastic, because you don't want the sparks coming in and burning holes through this. So we're going to set it a few feet away. That heat is going to radiate through this plastic and superheat inside this shelter. So if it's frigid 40 below, this shelter is going to keep you warm and toasty, because that fire is going to heat you up. Even without a fire, this shelter in itself is going to keep you toasty warm. Ideally, I guess you would want to try and do like a full-length body fire. It's going to heat you from head to toe. But again, you don't really need it, because the way it does radiate through here, it's going to disperse that heat through that whole thing. But if it's super cold, the bigger your fire out here, the better. One of our other videos, you saw one of our smaller emergency fires, the one log fire. Even something like that, set a little bit closer to this plastic, it's not going to generate a lot of sparks, but it could be enough heat to warm up the inside if it's really frigid. Now also, this shelter we do have the leaves on top. If you're in an emergency situation, you had to get a shelter really fast because you got a nasty storm rolling in, the importance is to stay dry. You could throw this shelter up without the leaves and without so many ribs on here, and you could have this shelter done if you really were hustling in 30, maybe 45 minutes, or less time if you were really working hard. So if you had a bad storm and you needed to stay warm and dry, you can get this done. All right, so as I mentioned before, everything always screws up when you're talking on camera, but the leaves on this are fairly thick. The ground is cold. In bad climate, you're going to lose a lot of body heat to the ground. So we get a good layer of leaves. I know it might be hard to tell here, but we've got, probably about 6 inches of leaves in this general area. Now, leaves will compress when you lay on them, but that gives you a really good insulation value. The more leaves you can put in here, the warmer you're going to be. We got quite a few leaves in the back. That's where the weather is coming from. Wind, rain. The wind here blows from the west to the east, so we've got this faced away from the weather. So the wind and the rain is going to hammer this side. It's going to keep us dry. We don't want this flipped the other way, because if rain was sheeting in this way, that could possibly push that plastic in and get us wet. So we're going to roll around to the other side here real quick again. And where he has it laid down, you can see how thick I made that leaf litter. Now, it may not always be possible to get this much leaves in here on your shelter, but you're going to do as many leaves as you possibly can. And if you're lacking on leaves, it's more important to have the leaves inside the shelter than it is on the outside of the shelter, because this is going to be heating or warming you from the cold on the ground. Whereas up here, you have the plastic and the mylar blanket and the black sheeting to help keep you warm and insulate you. But that's it for the super shelter for now. We are going to work on getting the campfire, so we'll get back to you here in a little bit and show you what it looks like with the fire on it. Okay, so we got our fire ring built. We got our fire going. The fire ring serves two purposes. Number one, foremost, it keeps the fire from spreading. We don't want to start a forest fire, so it keeps it contained. Also, the next thing it does is those rocks will absorb and retain heat. So even after that fire goes out, we'll still have heat radiating from those rocks, which will help keep us warm. So we got the fire tonight. Anthony's going to stay in this. When he's ready to go to bed, he's going to pull this plastic down over in front of him once he gets this fire going pretty well. The heat from the fire is going to radiate through this plastic sheet, which is going to warm up in here. Any heat that's lost that goes past him is going to reflect off of this mylar blanket here and back down on him. And then, of course, we've got the leaves, as you saw earlier, on the back that is also going to retain heat. So I'm willing to bet that poor Anthony here is going to be too hot in this shelter, even though this morning we woke up at about 7 o'clock, got out of our tents, our shelters, and it was about 20 degrees out here, which means, you know, about an hour earlier we were in the mid to upper teens. So I expect tonight it's going to be in the teens, and he's going to be more than enough warm. Last thing is this, this pretty good sized shelter for being a super shelter, which is great. Creatures of comfort, we like to have our space, our comfort. He's not going to feel claustrophobic in this shelter. He's got enough room in here for his gear. He can spread out comfortably. He's about 7 foot 12 inches tall. No, he's about 6 foot tall, so he's got lots of room. Nice bed of leaves for his comfort. He's got the super shelter to keep him warm. That's it. That's it for the super shelter. Great shelter to build, especially if you're in the back country and it's going to be frigid temperatures. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and you learned something. I'll see you next time.